The film opens in the way a memory does, sunlight flickering through leaves, the sounds of children laughing and chasing each other across a church lawn. It is July 1987, and home video cameras, bulky and humming, catch snippets of the day. There is the priest shaking hands by the folding tables, mothers laying out foil-covered casseroles, fathers carrying coolers of soda and ice. 6 children dart in and out of the frame, a blur of red shorts, a braid whipping across a shoulder, someone clutching a balloon animal, another balancing a plate of watermelon. The tape skips, the color smears, and the laughter blends with bird song. On the surface, it looks like the perfect small-town picnic, the kind communities tell themselves they'll remember forever. But this is the last recorded moment of those children alive in public, the last time anyone saw them playing in the sun. The official story that would be told later was neat and unsatisfying. Authorities suggested that in the chaos of families packing up, 6 kids must have wandered toward the edge of the woods that bordered the church grounds. Children go missing, one officer said in a clipped interview. It happens. Search dogs were brought out, though no scent trails were ever confirmed. Within days, the woods were declared scoured, the pond dredged, and the case labeled an abduction by unknown persons. Families were left with that thin explanation, and the town folded the story into rumor, the way small towns often do, half memory, half myth. But the truth always had splinters. Parents insisted their children would not have gone off together willingly. Not all 6 at once. A few surviving tapes from the day show something peculiar. At one point, a man in clerical robes ushers a small group toward the parish hall, his hand resting too firmly on a child's shoulder. The camera lingers for only a second before swinging back toward the picnic tables. And if you weren't looking for it, you would miss it entirely. It is this fragment that, decades later, investigators play again and again, freezing the frame, enhancing the image, noting the timestamp. What unsettles viewers most is the contrast. In one frame, children are running freely in sunlight. In the next, there is the shadow of the church hall doors closing behind them, and then nothing. No one recalls seeing them leave. No one reported the doors opening again. For 37 years, the case stayed dormant. Families aged, carrying unanswered grief. Townsfolk moved on but lowered their voices when the subject arose. Newspapers ran anniversary stories, each thinner than the last, reducing 6 vibrant lives to a line of photographs with fading edges. The church, meanwhile, continued its services, renovated its facade, and folded into the background hum of community life. The building itself seemed to outlast memory, standing as both sanctuary and silent witness. And then came 2024. During renovations on the church basement, contractors swung a hammer through plaster and heard the hollow thud of something concealed. Beneath decades of paint and drywall, they found a bricked-over doorway sealed with cement. Behind it, stale air rushed out, and the smell of mold and rust carried into the worksite. The workers stopped, unsettled, calling the foreman, who in turn called local police. When the bricked wall was fully broken through, a room was revealed, dusty folding chairs, hymnals stacked neatly in a corner, and children's drawings pinned to the walls with rusted tacks. The discovery tore open the wound of 1987. News crews descended. Families were contacted, and the town was forced to remember what it had buried. For 37 years, the narrative had been of children lost to the woods. Now there was a sealed room inside the church itself, a contradiction so sharp, it made every official statement from 1987 feel like a lie. The camera lingers on that room now, empty yet crowded with echoes. Viewers see the crayon marks, the childish handwriting, the outlines of stick figures on yellowed paper. No remains are shown, only absence. An absence loud enough to drown out the official silence. This is the story we begin to follow. How 6 children vanished under the cover of a church picnic. How a community convinced itself to forget. And how a sealed door, cracked open after nearly 4 decades, threatened to unravel everything that was supposed to stay hidden. The official record of the 1987 church picnic disappearance has the cold, polished tone of a file written to be closed. Within hours of the children being reported missing, the narrative had already begun to settle into place. Police blotters described possible abduction by unknown individual, while local television news broadcasts repeated the same. Clipped sound bites from officers standing in front of the church gates. One anchor, speaking over footage of frantic parents, assured viewers that everything possible is being done, and that early indications point to a likely abductor fleeing into nearby woods. No name, no suspect. Just a faceless explanation wrapped in official authority. The search itself was brief and strangely procedural. Volunteers combed the woods behind the church, men in jeans and baseball caps forming lines as deputies shouted orders. The pond on the property's edge was dredged. Its water turned into a slurry of mud and weeds under the whine of pumps. Helicopters circled overhead for a single day, then vanished. By the end of the week, the command post was dismantled. A sheriff's spokesman told the press there were no credible leads. Within 2 weeks, the narrative was frozen. 6 children had vanished into the wilderness, and their trail ended there. For the families, this version of events was impossible to swallow. Parents asked why their children, aged between 7 and 11, would all run off together. Mothers pressed investigators. How could no one in the bustling picnic grounds have seen them leave? Fathers questioned why the search was called off so quickly, when not a single footprint or scrap of clothing was recovered. The answers they received were the kind that bruise without leaving marks. Kids are unpredictable. We followed every lead. Sometimes we never find out why. Yet contradictions crept in. Early press reports quoted officers saying they believed the children had been lured away by someone they knew, while later statements omitted that detail entirely. One article from July 1987 mentioned a sighting of the children near the parish hall at dusk, but in later coverage that line vanished. Donation ledgers and meeting minutes from the church that summer, documents normally neat and consistent, contained curious gaps for the very week of the disappearance. When parents requested access to full case files, they were told the investigation was ongoing and documents could not be released, though the case was publicly declared inactive only months later. Over the years, these inconsistencies hardened into silence. Families were left to organize candlelight vigils on their own. Small-town newspapers reduced coverage to anniversary blurbs, showing black and white photographs of 6 smiling faces above the words, "Still missing." Officials shifted jobs, retired, or passed away, leaving behind nothing but their statements on grainy VHS news tapes. The story calcified into a single line. 6 children disappeared. From a church picnic in 1987, no evidence of foul play was ever confirmed. But beneath that line lies a void that families never accepted, that neighbors whispered about in backyards, that children in the town grew up hearing as a half-remembered cautionary tale. It was always said with finality, as though speaking against the official version was disrespectful, dangerous even. And the church, its stone facade towering above the picnic grounds, stood untouched. Its basement rooms used for potlucks, choir practice, and youth group meetings, while the sealed chamber below remained forgotten. Now, in light of the renovations, the contradictions grow louder. How could the official record claim no evidence inside the church when a room was found hidden behind concrete walls? How could officers insist on a forest disappearance when drawings, cots, and hymnals surfaced from within the very building that had served as the children's gathering place? The official story was built to withstand scrutiny for a year, perhaps 5, but not 37. With each artifact pulled from the dust, the neat narrative begins to collapse, exposing how much was deliberately left unsaid. The first entry into the sealed room is not filmed like a dramatic breakthrough, but as something quieter, almost reverent, the way one might walk into a crypt. The renovation crew had already punched through the brick wall, and police tape sagged loosely across the doorway, half-hearted in its attempt to keep anyone out. When the investigative team steps inside for the first time, every footfall stirs a breath of air so old it smells metallic, like rust and candle smoke. Their flashlights sweep across walls painted, the same off-white as the church basement, though here the paint flakes like brittle parchment. A folding chair lies on its side, its metal legs rusted into the concrete floor as if it had been frozen mid-motion. The room itself is small, no larger than a classroom. The ceiling is low, pipes snaking overhead, dripping condensation in steady measured drops. Against one wall, a row of wooden cots lean in collapse, mattresses long gone, replaced by dark stains and shredded fabric. The air is heavy, saturated with mold, and yet certain objects remain surprisingly intact. Hymnals stacked neatly in a corner, their covers mottled but their pages legible. A stack of paper cups crushed into one another, faded but whole. It is the drawings that hold attention, pinned to the wall with rusted tacks or sheets of paper, curling at the edges, covered in crayon. Childlike scrawls of suns, stick figures holding hands, crooked crosses and something else, dark, heavy scribbles that cut across entire pages, as though a small hand had pressed too hard, again and again. One sheet shows 6 figures standing beside a building, unmistakably shaped like the church itself, its steeple crooked but recognizable. Next to it, in bold, uneven letters, is a name written over and over, as though the child had been practicing, Anna. Investigators move slowly, their gloved hands brushing across surfaces, careful not to disturb more than they must. They note the absence of dust on certain areas, as though objects had once stood there and been removed before the wall was sealed. A faint rectangular outline on the floor suggests a large box or chest was dragged out before the bricks went up. Someone tried to erase evidence, but the ghost of its presence lingers in the marks left behind. There is no sign of human remains, no bones or fragments to answer the family's most brutal questions. Yet the silence of the room is oppressive, and the artifacts left behind speak louder than absence. A flashlight beam lingers on a child's shoe, tiny. Red canvas, its rubber sole cracked and curling. Next to it, a plastic toy soldier rests on its side, one arm broken off. These things do not belong in a sealed chamber. They belong to lives interrupted, to stories cut short. The atmosphere shifts from curiosity to dread. Every investigator feels it. This was not a storage room, not an unused basement chamber. This was a place occupied, lived in, however briefly. And the official claim that nothing unusual was ever found inside the church shatters the moment these objects are documented. The evidence is too ordinary to be dismissed, too intimate to be coincidence. The cameras roll, capturing the first sweeping shots of the chamber. Viewers see the narrow doorway, the cramped walls, the scattered relics of lives that should have continued outside in sunlight. They hear the creak of the floor beneath cautious steps, the low hum of flashlights, the drip-drip of condensation echoing like a metronome. Every detail says the same thing. Someone kept these children here. By the time the team exits back into the wider basement, the sealed room no longer feels like part of the church, but like a scar it tried to hide. The investigators exchange few words, but their silence carries weight. This discovery is not the end of a mystery. It is the beginning of a larger unraveling. The discovery of the old church bulletins seems almost incidental at first, as if they were just another piece of clutter buried under decades of dust. They sit stacked in a box in the corner of the sealed room, wedged behind a cot frame that has collapsed against the wall. The covers are faded, the paper brittle, the ink a pale gray-green that has bled slightly with moisture. They are the weekly bulletins handed out to parishioners in 1987 announcements of choir rehearsals, bake sales, youth group outings. On the surface, they are ordinary relics of a church calendar, a glimpse into the rhythms of small-town life. But as investigators leaf through the stack, something begins to emerge. In the margins, scrawled in pen, there are notes that should not exist. The handwriting is hurried, uneven, perhaps done in secrecy during a service. On one bulletin, beside an announcement for a picnic date, a line has been written, "Children to stay after, dusk." Another bears a phrase that chills everyone who reads it. "Doors stay locked until song is over." These phrases do not belong to the printed structure of the bulletin. They belong to someone who was trying to capture fragments of instructions or reminders, someone who believed these words mattered enough to jot down where no one would notice. The more the stack is sifted, the more cryptic notes appear. A bulletin announcing the choir's summer hymn list has a margin marked with the words, "Night gathering, no outsiders." Another, folded sharply as though carried in a pocket, bears initials in sequence, 6 letters, the same number as the missing children. No last names, no explanations, just a row of initials written in a hand that presses so hard, the pen nearly tears the paper. What unsettles the investigators most is how ordinary these bulletins were meant to be. Parishioners would have read them casually, tucked them into hymnals or slipped them into purses. To find secret instructions hidden among bake sale announcements creates the sense of two overlapping realities. The public face of the church and a private code known only to a select few. Forensic analysis later reveals that the handwriting does not match the priest in charge at the time, but it does resemble notes kept by one of the deacons, a man who died in the mid-1990s. He had no surviving family, and his role in the original investigation was peripheral at best. Yet here are his scrawls, capturing something never mentioned to police, something deliberately concealed. The atmosphere in the sealed room shifts as each bulletin is photographed and bagged for evidence. What began as an eerie discovery of a forgotten chamber now feels like proof of planning. These were not spontaneous accidents or a one-time lapse in oversight. The bulletins suggest structure, intent, an organized pattern woven into the life of the parish itself. As the notes are read aloud, the language echoes uncomfortably with ritual. Doors stay locked until song is over. What song? Who gave the order? And why write it in the margin of a weekly bulletin rather than in a private notebook? The investigators speculate. Perhaps the bulletins were the only paper at hand during services, the only place where instructions could be jotted discreetly without raising suspicion. Or perhaps the writer believed hiding notes in plain sight was the safest way to preserve them. Later, when the footage is reviewed, viewers will see close-up shots of the pages, the uneven handwriting, the faint indentation of pen strokes on fragile paper. They will hear the narrator's voice, calm but weighted, pointing out the initials, the chilling lines, the overlap of sacred and profane. The image lingers on one bulletin in particular. Beneath the words youth group meeting, Thursday 7 p.m. lies the scrawled warning. Almost illegible now. Keep them below until bells ring. It is here, in these casual sheets of paper meant to guide a congregation's week, that the story deepens. The official narrative of children lost to the woods falters under the weight of these margins. If the notes are genuine, someone within the church not only knew where the children were, but deliberately documented their confinement. The sealed room gave silence and artifacts. The bulletins give voice, a voice of someone who was there, scribbling in the shadows of faith, leaving behind the first undeniable trace of complicity. The paper trail around the summer of 1987 should be straightforward. Churches thrive on records, ledgers of donations, minutes from council meetings, payroll logs for maintenance staff, sign-up sheets for youth groups. Every activity, no matter how small, usually leaves some kind of written trace. But when investigators start piecing together the documents tied to the week of the picnic, they find something that feels less like a gap and more like a deliberate erasure. The church's council minutes for July of that year are neatly typed and bound in chronological order until they reach the page that should have recorded the meeting held 2 days after. The children vanished. Instead of typed notes, there is a blank sheet. The secretary's name and the date appear at the top in faded typewriter ink, but the space where discussion points should be is left empty, save for a faint indentation as if words had once been typed and then covered over. In every other month's record, the meetings run pages long, filled with detail about budget decisions, choir selections, and maintenance repairs. But for the most critical week in church history, silence. Payroll records for the maintenance staff show another oddity. One worker, a man named Carter, is listed as clocking in and out regularly throughout the summer. But for the 7 days following the picnic, his entries vanish entirely. His name reappears the week after, without explanation, as if he had never missed a shift. When investigators cross-check with tax filings, they see wages were still paid out for that missing week, though no time was logged. When Carter was questioned in 1987, police noted he had no recollection of the day in question. He died in 2004, leaving no testimony behind. Financial ledgers for July contain another anomaly. Donations are usually steady, modest sums of cash and checks written by families after Sunday services, yet the ledger line for the Sunday, immediately following the disappearances, lists a single, unusually large deposit, many times the normal amount, entered without a donor's name. The handwriting of the entry does not match the treasurer's script for the rest of the year, and the ink, under ultraviolet examination, appears to have been written with a different pen altogether. Town records deepen the unease. The police blotter for July 1987 is missing pages, torn out neatly along the binding. The index at the front of the volume lists a call logged at 9:14 p.m. on the night of the picnic, originating from the church's rectory phone. The call itself, whatever complaint or emergency prompted it, is gone, ripped away along with several surrounding entries. The index shows it existed. The record book pretends it never did. For families of the missing children, these gaps feel like fresh betrayal. Parents had long suspected the investigation was cursory, but the discovery that key documents are missing or altered confirms their fears of neglect, or worse, suppression. One mother, now gray-haired and soft-spoken, sits before the camera as she recalls requesting copies of the council minutes in the late 1980s. She was told the records contained nothing of note and were not relevant to the search. Now, watching investigators hold up the blank July page under bright lights, her eyes water with anger. "They lied to us," she says, barely above a whisper. The effect of the missing week is more than symbolic. It represents the collapse of trust between a community and its institutions, a church meant to shepherd its flock, a police department sworn to protect. Both kept records, proof of diligence, accountability, continuity. And yet, at the moment when truth mattered most, the records fall silent, like witnesses who suddenly refuse to speak. As viewers watch archival footage of officials standing before microphones in 1987, insisting all leads have been followed, the narrator's voice cuts in, measured but sharp. If all leads were followed, why do the ledgers stop? Why are minutes blank? Why does the payroll vanish and reappear? The juxtaposition is damning. What emerges from the missing week is not only suspicion, but the first clear suggestion of coordination. A blank page can be an accident. A missing entry can be oversight. But a cluster of absences across church records, payroll, financial ledgers, and police logs begins to look like intent. Someone wanted the trail to go cold. Someone wanted that week to disappear with the children. The first living voice willing to break the silence comes from someone who has carried her story like a stone in her chest for nearly 4 decades. She is 71 now, her hair thin and silver, her hands tremoring slightly as she grips the arms of a worn living room chair. In 1987, she was a Sunday school teacher at the church, responsible for corralling restless children into pews and keeping them quiet during sermons. For years, she never spoke publicly, afraid of ridicule, afraid of what the community might say. But when she learns about the sealed room uncovered during renovations, she agrees to meet the investigative team. "I can't carry this anymore," she says, her voice a rasp of relief and dread. She remembers the picnic with painful clarity. The smell of grilled hot dogs drifting across the lawn, the sound of hymnals carried out by the choir as they rehearsed under the open sky. The children had been running between tables, chasing each other in bursts of laughter, their cheeks red from the summer heat. Toward dusk, she recalls seeing a cluster of them near the parish hall, their laughter subdued. A priest and 2 deacons were standing by the door, ushering the group inside. At first, she thought nothing of it. Children were often called in early for choir practice or preparation for Sunday school skits. But what struck her, even in that moment, was the look on the children's faces. Hesitation, glances backward toward the picnic still in full swing, one girl tugging at another's sleeve as if reluctant to go. When the doors closed behind them, she felt something inside her tighten. She told herself she was imagining things, that the unease was hers alone. But then came the words. As she walked past the hall on her way to fetch more paper plates, she heard one of the deacons murmur, "Keep them there until the bells." She slowed, straining to hear more. But the men noticed her and abruptly changed the subject to hymn selections. She forced a smile, nodded politely, and moved on. The phrase lodged itself in her mind, though, cryptic, unsettling. That night, after the picnic ended and families began searching for their children, she thought again of the doors, of the way they had closed firmly, with finality. When she tried to mention this to the police in the first chaotic hours, she says she was waved off. "Children wander," one officer told her. "They'll turn up." In the following days, as the search widened and panic spread, she returned to the memory again and again. Finally, she confided to a fellow teacher what she had seen and heard. The next morning, the parish priest called her into his office. She remembers the blinds drawn against the summer sun, the priest sitting stiffly behind his desk. His words were gentle but carried an edge she never forgot. He told her not to repeat what she thought she had heard. "You could damage lives," he said, "yours included." He warned that rumors could destroy the church, that speaking out would harm the grieving families, that it was her duty as a Christian to remain silent and trust in God's justice. She left the office shaken, ashamed, and, most of all, afraid. For years she swallowed that memory, convincing herself she had misheard, that grief and fear had colored her recollection. But when investigators now show her the bulletins with scrawled notes, "Keep them below until bells ring," her face pales. The exact phrase she carried all these years is there in black ink, scribbled decades ago by someone else's hand. "So I wasn't imagining it," she whispers, tears sliding down her face. Her testimony is fragile yet devastating. It provides the first direct, human link between the children and the church building itself. It also underscores the climate of fear and intimidation that surrounded the case in 1987. She was not just dismissed, she was silenced. And in a town where the church was the center of social life, her silence was not unusual, it was survival. As she leans back in her chair, the camera lingers on her lined face, her eyes darting toward the window as though the past might still be watching. "They knew," she says finally. "They all knew, and they told me to forget." The room is quiet except for the soft ticking of a clock. For the first time, the case has a living witness whose memory slices through the official story. It is not conclusive proof, but it is the first crack in the wall of silence. And once a crack forms, the rest often follows. The next phase of the investigation takes place not in the archives or in someone's living room, but under the floor itself. After the sealed chamber is opened, engineers begin a structural survey of the church basement, looking for other anomalies in the concrete. What they find is unsettling. Directly beneath the chamber, the ground rings hollow in certain places, the sound of hammer taps echoing strangely, as though something had been poured hastily and unevenly. Core samples confirm their suspicions. Beneath the surface is a second layer of concrete, poured years later than the surrounding foundation. At first glance, this might be explained by repairs, but the date is wrong. Testing shows the mixture hardened around 1991, 4 years after the children vanished, 4 years after the search was officially closed. By then, the church had already resumed normal services, and the missing children were considered a cold case. Why, then, was a section of the basement floor torn up and re-poured? And why does this patch align precisely with the room where drawings and cots were found? Work begins to carefully break through the overlay, each strike of the hammer echoing like a pulse through the chamber. Dust swirls, and the sharp smell of concrete dust burns the investigators' throats. The process is slow, deliberate, as if excavating an unmarked grave. Within hours, small fragments emerge, bits of wood, twisted metal, and then something smaller, more intimate. A child's shoe, the canvas fabric shriveled and the rubber sole warped but unmistakable. Its size is tiny, no bigger than a 7-year-old's foot. Nearby, embedded in the hardened mix, lies a rusted bicycle bell, its once bright jingle reduced to a dull rattle when shaken. These objects don't belong under a second layer of concrete. They belong in the world of children, on picnic lawns, sidewalks, bedrooms filled with toys. Here, pressed into the floor, they feel like offerings or worse, attempts to bury reminders of what had taken place above. The investigators pause, documenting every fragment with photographs before lifting them carefully into evidence bags. The psychological weight of the find is heavy. For families of the missing, the shoe and the bell are devastatingly real, not symbols but pieces of lives cut short, unlike the drawings or the bulletins, which could be dismissed as circumstantial. These artifacts are physical proof. Children were here, their belongings trapped beneath deliberate cement. It suggests more than confinement. It suggests concealment. The cameras capture the moment the first artifact is held up to the light. The lens lingers on the faded red canvas of the shoe, the way dust clings stubbornly to the frayed lace holes. The narrator's voice is low, solemn, reminding viewers that in 1991, the church underwent routine renovations. Records from that period note basement structural repairs, but provide no receipts for contractors, no invoices for labor. It is as though the work was done quietly, off the books, with no paper trail left behind. The official explanation crumbles further. If the children vanished into the woods, why would their possessions be entombed under concrete inside the church? If the church leadership had nothing to hide, why pour a second floor 4 years later, long after the case was closed? The timeline is wrong, the evidence damning. The site becomes both crime scene and memorial. Investigators mark the perimeter with yellow tape, and for a time the church basement is flooded with police, forensic teams, and journalists craning for glimpses of the dig. Yet the church leadership remains conspicuously silent, declining to answer questions, releasing only a short statement that the objects discovered may have no connection to the disappearance in 1987. The claim feels hollow in the face of physical artifacts pulled from beneath cement, artifacts no one can explain away. Late at night, when the crew has gone, the room holds its silence again. The patched floor, now fractured open, seems to breathe secrets. For those who stand in the chamber, the knowledge presses down like weight. Someone came here years after the disappearance. Someone took the time to seal away these reminders, Someone counted on the world never looking beneath the surface again. The pressure comes swiftly as though rehearsed. Within days of the discovery in the basement, the diocese issues a polished press release. It opens with sympathy, offering continued prayers for the families of the missing, but pivots quickly to language that sounds rehearsed, defensive. The artifacts are likely misplaced items from decades of parish activity. The sealed room, a disused storage chamber from earlier renovations. The statement insists that drawing sinister conclusions is deeply harmful to the church and its community, but words alone are not the strategy. Investigators working the case begin receiving unexpected visits and phone calls. A local journalist covering the excavation finds her editor abruptly, pulling her from the assignment, citing pressure from above. A former altar boy, now in his 40s, who had tentatively agreed to speak on camera about strange occurrences during the summer of 1987, withdraws overnight, sending a brief text. "I can't. Please don't contact me again." The atmosphere shifts palpably, as though a net is tightening around those daring to remember. Then comes the first direct warning. One of the lead investigators receives a letter slipped under his motel room door. No envelope, no signature, just plain white paper with the words, "Stop digging, or you'll find more than you want." The handwriting is blocky, deliberate but shaky enough to suggest haste. When shown to local police, the response is tepid. They dismiss it as a prank, another example of outsiders stirring up old wounds. Yet the investigator cannot shake the image of someone slipping quietly down the motel hallway, carrying threats like scripture. The diocese begins its own campaign in the community. At Sunday services, priests address their congregations directly, framing the investigation as an attack on faith. Parishioners are urged not to succumb to rumor, to hold steadfast in unity. One priest even tells his flock that outsiders are attempting to profit from tragedy. The tactic is clear: fracture the town's trust in investigators, reframe suspicion as persecution, and cast doubt on every unsettling artifact pulled from the basement floor. For the families of the missing children, this is devastating. Some cling to hope that answers may finally come. Yet others feel trapped between loyalty to their faith and the gnawing truth in their hearts. Interviews reveal the fractures. One mother breaks down sobbing, saying she has been told by her parish friends not to encourage slander. Another father quietly admits he hasn't set foot inside the church since the summer of 1987, but fears speaking openly will destroy what little peace he has left. The families are caught between institutions they once trusted and evidence that refuses to stay buried. Meanwhile, investigators piece together financial records from the early 1990s. They find a curious entry: large cash withdrawals from parish funds, noted simply as maintenance. The sums are substantial for a small-town church, enough to hire workers without leaving a contractor's paper trail. When asked for records, the diocese insists those documents were misfiled or destroyed during office transitions. Each missing receipt, each vanished file only tightens the knot of suspicion. The tension escalates in town. Flyers appear on telephone poles warning residents not to aid outsiders in tearing down the parish. A local radio show hosts a call-in where anonymous voices label the investigation a witch hunt, yet beneath the noise, whispers grow. Bartenders recall odd conversations in the years after the picnic. Retired janitor tells a neighbor about late-night basement work in 1991. Though he refuses to go on record, the narrative of institutional defense collides with the slow drip of lived memory, neither able to fully erase the other. As the camera pans across the church at dusk, its steeple casting a long shadow, bells tolling in the evening, the narrator's voice underscores the contradiction. On the surface, the institution projects unity and reverence, but underground, beneath layers of concrete and silence, lies evidence too stubborn to ignore. The diocese's pressure campaign reveals not confidence, but fear. Fear that the more is uncovered, the more their carefully maintained story will unravel. The artifact cache comes not from beneath the concrete this time, but from a locked filing cabinet in the rectory attic, discovered during a secondary sweep. The air is thick with dust, insulation fibers drifting like pale ash whenever boxes are shifted. Inside one of the cabinets is a stack of old church bulletins and ledgers, ordinary on the surface, but at the bottom lies a slim notebook, its cover stained with water damage. its pages curled at the edges. On the inside front cover, written in a child's uneven script, is a single name, one that matches one of the 6 who vanished in 1987. The pages are filled with ordinary Sunday school notes, verses copied out, doodles of animals, arithmetic problems in the margins, but woven through the pages, written in lighter pencil strokes and sometimes between the lines of scripture, are fragments that stop the investigators cold. "We are not to go outside," one note reads, squeezed into the blank space above a hymn transcription. Another on a later page says, "They tell us the bells mean safe." The handwriting is halting, rushed but unmistakably youthful. The team brings in handwriting specialists to compare the script with samples from school, assignments preserved in police files. The match is strong, enough to suggest authenticity rather than fabrication. If true, the notebook may be the most direct voice yet of a child held within those walls. But the authenticity brings its own horror. The entries are dated sporadically, some clustered in July and August 1987, others faint and smeared, suggesting later editions. If the dates are correct, at least some of the children were alive for weeks after the day they were reported missing. One page in particular chills everyone who reads it. Amid doodles of crosses and flowers, written in faint lines at the bottom, are the words, "The door is heavy." We hear them above us. Sometimes we hear Mom. It is impossible to read without imagining small ears, straining at the floorboards. The muffled sounds of families and congregants just a few feet away, unaware of the hidden room below. Not all of the notes are coherent. Some are scribbles. "Don't cry." "Don't say, bells mean stop," repeated over and over like mantras. One page has the word safe written in large block letters, then scratched through violently until the paper nearly tore. These are not the idle scribbles of a bored child in Sunday school. They are the fragments of someone trying to make sense of confinement, someone grasping for comfort in the only tools they had: paper, pencil, and faith. The notebook also bears physical scars. Several pages are water-stained, their ink blurred. Others show faint indentations, where words were pressed hard enough to leave impressions on the next sheet but not fully written. Forensic imaging recovers some of these hidden marks, revealing another phrase: "Don't open when they knock." The sentence hangs heavy, its meaning ambiguous but sinister. The investigators treat the notebook as both evidence and testimony. For the families, when they are shown copies of certain pages, the reactions are raw. One mother recognizes her child's doodle style instantly, the little stick figures with oversized hands, identical to drawings pinned to refrigerators and old family photos. She breaks down, clutching the photocopy, whispering that it is the first new thing from him in 37 years. Another parent, though, refuses to look, unable to bear the idea that their child might have lived for weeks unseen, unheard, abandoned beneath the very place they prayed. The diocese responds with predictable dismissal. They call the notebook misfiled Sunday school material and suggest that investigators are reading too much into childish scribbles. But the handwriting analysis and dated entries suggest otherwise, and the specificity of phrases like "the door is heavy" cannot be explained away by ordinary lessons. The journal margins add not just evidence, but texture, the children's own voices reaching forward through time. Each line deepens the contradiction between the official narrative and the unfolding truth. They had not simply vanished into the woods. They were here, in the church's hidden spaces, listening for bells, scratching their fears into paper no one was meant to find. And if this notebook survived, investigators cannot help but wonder what else was hidden, and who took the care to leave it behind. The town becomes a mirror cracked down the middle. Every conversation in grocery store aisles, at gas pumps, in the school parking lot, circling back to the discoveries beneath the church. For some, the evidence is undeniable. The shoe pulled from concrete, the notebook with its childlike script, the sealed room itself. For others, disbelief hardens into anger. To them, these revelations are attacks, not on individuals, but on faith, on the one institution that had anchored their lives for generations. In diners, you can hear it in the clipped tones of farmers and teachers hunched over coffee. "You're telling me my priest poured concrete over kids?" One scoffs, slamming his mug down hard enough to splash. At the next booth over, a woman shakes her head and says quietly, "My cousin's boy is one of them." You can't explain away a shoe. The arguments aren't loud but constant, humming through the air like an electrical charge. The split reveals itself even in small gestures. At Sunday service, some pews are packed. with families standing shoulder to shoulder, in solidarity with their parish, while other pews stand empty, once faithful congregants unable to reconcile worship with what is unfolding beneath the building. The offering plate gathers fewer bills. The silence between hymns is taut. Priests deliver sermons about persecution and faith under fire, their words landing with force on those desperate to believe, while ringing hollow for those whose grief has festered for decades. Local businesses feel it too. A bakery owner who speaks out in support of the investigation finds her windows smeared with paint one morning. Leave God's house alone. Across town, a gas station attendant wears a ribbon pinned to his shirt in the colors once used during the search for the children, a quiet act of defiance that sparks whispered support from customers who murmur thanks under their breath. The town is no longer just divided, it is policed by its own residents. Every gesture weighed and judged. Among the families of the missing, unity fractures as well. A mother who long defended the church now stops answering calls from other parents, unwilling to face what the notebook suggests. Another family begins meeting privately with investigators, convinced that the truth has finally begun to surface. These once close circles of shared grief begin to splinter, each parent navigating the unbearable in their own way, and the pain of old friendships breaking under pressure adds a fresh layer of loss. Local officials struggle to keep order. The sheriff, himself a parish member, issues a statement, urging the community not to jump to conclusions. His words echo through town hall, meetings where residents line up at microphones, some demanding arrests, others demanding the investigation be shut down. The sessions turn hostile, voices raised, accusations thrown. A retired deputy admits reluctantly that some files may have gone missing over the years, further fueling suspicion that the original case was mishandled, or worse, deliberately obstructed. The investigative team documents everything, careful not to sensationalize but unable to ignore the intensity of the divide. They film town meetings, quiet protests on courthouse steps, late-night candlelight vigils, organized by a small group who refuse to let the children's memory be buried again. The footage reveals not just a community confronting a tragedy, but a community confronting itself, its loyalties, its blindness, its complicity. The most telling moment comes when a young man in his 20s, too young to remember the picnic itself but raised in its shadow, speaks on camera. He describes growing up with whispers, the way kids at school use the disappearance as a dare story. The church kids are still in the basement, until laughter fell silent whenever parents entered the room. We all knew something was wrong, he says, his voice breaking. We were told never to talk about it. His words bridged generations, proof that silence was never absence. It was control. By the end of this phase, the town feels less like a place and more like a battlefield of narratives. One half clings to the church's denial as an act of survival. The other half begins to see the evidence, not as rumor but as reality pressing upward, through concrete and time. In that fracture lies the heart of the mystery. Not only what happened to the 6 children, but how an entire community learned to bury questions along with them. It begins with a box mislabeled as Youth Choir, 1986-88, retrieved from the storage loft above the parish office. Inside are tangled cords, broken microphones, and a dozen cassette tapes in brittle plastic cases. Most are recordings of choir rehearsals, children's voices, singing hymns in imperfect harmony punctuated by coughs, giggles, and the occasional squeak of a folding chair. But one tape is different. Its label is almost worn away, written faintly in red ink, Bell's Practice. When played, the cassette starts innocently enough. A familiar hymn drifts from the speakers, muffled as though recorded from the far end of a hallway. Then faintly, another sound surfaces underneath the music. Voices, not singing but speaking, overlapping in hurried whispers. The investigators lean closer, straining to separate words from static. At first it seems impossible, the hum of the old tape machine swallowing detail. But when slowed and filtered, the voices resolve into the high, unmistakable tones of children. One child says clearly, "Don't talk." Another responds, voice trembling, "But I'm hungry." There is a shuffling noise, the scrape of something against wood or concrete, followed by a low adult voice that is too blurred to make out. Then the bells ring, the distinct toll from the church steeple above, resonant and heavy, vibrating through the cassette like a tremor. After the bells, silence falls. It is the kind of silence that feels thick, deliberate, almost heavier than sound itself. The team plays the tape again and again, documenting every second, every flicker of noise. They know how fragile audio can be, how easily skeptics dismiss it. But the cadence of the children's voices, the fragments of words, and the timing of the bells create a pattern too pointed to ignore. Forensic audio experts later confirm that the voices are not background chatter from a choir rehearsal, but a separate recording, likely captured accidentally when someone reused the tape. For the families, the cassette is unbearable. When one mother hears the whispered, "I'm hungry," she collapses into tears, clutching her chest as though the air has been ripped from her lungs. Another father refuses to be in the room during playback, choosing instead to stand in the hallway, eyes closed, tears streaming silently down his face. The possibility that their children's last days were preserved on magnetic tape is both gift and wound, proof and torment. The church's response is immediate and defensive. A spokesperson claims the tape is damaged and misleading, insisting that the sounds are artifacts of age and poor recording conditions. They suggest that the so-called whispers are nothing more than choir children talking off mic, but the presence of the bells, distinctly recorded, distinct in timing, undercuts their dismissal. The bells were not random. They marked something. Just as the journal had suggested, they tell us the bells mean safe. The cassette adds a new dimension to the investigation: sound. Unlike written notes, which can be disputed as misinterpretations, the recording is visceral, undeniable. The children's fear bleeds through the static, turning the investigation from theoretical to immediate. For viewers, the moment is chilling. The grainy tape transports them back to 1987, not through photographs or records, but through the raw sound of trapped voices echoing from a sealed room. Yet the cassette raises its own questions. Who recorded it? Why was it stored with choir tapes instead of discarded? Was it kept intentionally, hidden among innocuous recordings, or forgotten by someone who never thought the voices would be noticed? The ambiguity gnaws at investigators, who begin to wonder if one of the very people tasked with hiding the truth wanted some record, however faint, to survive. The team ends the session with the cassette carefully placed in a padded evidence case, its reels stilled but its echoes lingering. Even in silence, the whispers seem to hang in the air. As though once spoken, they refuse to be buried again. The discovery of the cassette forces the investigators to sharpen their approach. For weeks, they have been gathering fragments, objects, testimonies, scribbled notes, but the diocese has countered each with vague denials, appeals to faith or accusations of rumor-mongering. Now, with audio evidence, the team prepares to confront the official story head-on, piece by piece. They lay out a timeline on a long table in their rented workspace. Newspaper clippings, police logs, parish bulletins, renovation invoices, and copies of diocesan statements, all pinned and taped in chronological order. The inconsistencies begin to glow like cracks in plaster. The official record claims the children disappeared between 6 and 7 p.m. on July 19, 1987, during the evening stretch of the picnic. Police logs from that night note the search began just after dark, with families combing the woods behind the church. But one parish bulletin recovered from the rectory attic carries a handwritten note dated July 22nd. Children in choir prep until bells. If authentic, this suggests someone in authority still accounted for the children days after their supposed disappearance. Further contradictions emerge when investigators trace the church's renovation records. The diocese maintains the 1991 basement work was routine, yet county permit logs show no record of a contractor hired for that year. Instead, a small withdrawal of $200 in cash appears in parish ledgers, labeled only structural needs. When investigators request clarification, the diocese insists the money covered roof repairs, though roofing companies from the period deny ever working on the church. The missing paperwork and unexplained cash point directly toward unrecorded basement activity, the same basement where the shoe and bicycle bell were entombed in concrete. The cassette adds another fissure. The diocese insists it is a damaged rehearsal tape, yet the investigators line up the sound of the bells with municipal tower logs that tracked each toll for scheduling maintenance. The logs show that the particular sequence heard on the tape, 3 strikes, followed by a pause, then 3 more, was rung only at Vespers, precisely at 8 p.m. on weeknights in the summer of 1987. That would place the recording not during choir practice hours, which ended at 6:30, but much later, when the children were supposedly missing and the search was already underway. When presented with these findings, church officials bristle. In a tense filmed exchange, a diocesan spokesperson repeats that no credible evidence ties the church to the children's disappearance. When pressed about the financial records, he claims old files suffer from clerical error. When asked about the bulletin note and the bell schedule, he leans on vagueness. Memories and records from so long ago are unreliable, but the facts laid out on the table speak louder than any denial. For the investigators, this is the first time the institution's wall of certainty begins to crumble under verifiable specifics. These are not whispers, rumors, or ambiguous scribbles. They are mismatched dates, missing permits, and audio aligned with municipal logs. The contradictions show intent. Someone shaped an official story that does not match the material record. Someone decided what would be remembered and what would be buried. In the town, word spreads quickly. Snippets of the investigators' findings leak into local conversations, fueling both fury and fear. Some residents finally begin to question the narrative they accepted for nearly 4 decades, while others double down, accusing the team of fabricating evidence to smear the parish. But this time, the questions cannot be brushed away with sermons. There are receipts missing, ledgers with gaps, bells tolling at hours they were never meant to. The section closes with the camera lingering on the timeline table, lines of paper, photographs, and scrawled notes connected by red string. Each piece of evidence looks mundane in isolation. A receipt here, a schedule there, but together they form a pattern unmistakable in its implications. The official story is not merely incomplete. It has been rewritten, and now piece by piece it is unraveling. The next breakthrough comes not from parish records or official logs, but from a dusty box retrieved during the slow, methodical clearing of the rectory basement. The box is small, no larger than a shoebox, its cardboard sides soft with moisture, and the faint smell of mildew rising as it is lifted. Inside are Polaroid photographs, their edges curled and colors faded to the muted tones of the late 1980s. At first glance, they appear ordinary: picnic tables, hymn practice, the church lawn on summer afternoons. But as the stack is sifted, the focus sharpens and the contents grow. Darker one Polaroid shows a group of children seated cross-legged on a basement floor, a chalkboard propped behind them. The angle is awkward, the image blurred at the edges, but the faces are unmistakably young, some of them belonging to the 6 who vanished in 1987. They are not smiling. Their gazes are downward, solemn, as though the photograph was not meant to capture joy but compliance. On the edge of the chalkboard is a single word scrawled in chalk: quiet. Another photograph is even more chilling. It shows a child's hand holding up a paper drawing, the same type of sketch that was found earlier in the sealed room. The edges of the paper are torn, and in the corner is a small name, written in pencil, the same name that appears in the recovered notebook margins. The photograph captures not only the drawing, but also the environment. Cinder block walls, a bare bulb overhead, and what looks like the corner of a cot pressed against the frame. These details align with the sealed chamber beneath the church, suggesting that the photographs were taken inside the very room, uncovered during renovations. Some of the Polaroids have writing on the back, in the same adult hand. Dates are scrawled: July 23rd, August 1st, August 5th, each falling days or weeks after the supposed disappearance. Alongside some dates are single words: choir, safe, bells. The handwriting matches notes seen in parish bulletins. Though officials have yet to acknowledge this, the effect is devastating. These are not random images. They are documentation, a record of presence long after the children were officially declared missing. The investigators handle the photographs with gloves, placing them under bright forensic lamps. Under magnification, new details emerge. A parish calendar pinned to a wall with the month circled, a rosary dangling from a hook, even the faint outline of a man's shoe at the edge of one frame. The evidence is mundane in isolation, but in the context of the missing children, it becomes suffocatingly precise. Someone within the parish not only confined the children, but chose to photograph them, to label and date their captivity, as though keeping a ledger of obedience. When copies are shown privately to the families, reactions vary from fury to collapse. One mother recognizes her daughter's braided hair and patterned dress, garments she remembers washing the night before the picnic. Another father, trembling, points to the corner of one photograph and whispers, "That's his toy truck. I gave him that for his birthday." The photographs are both confirmation and cruelty, proof that their children lived beyond the date etched into missing posters, but also evidence of their suffering under watchful eyes. The release of the Polaroids to the wider public detonates like a bomb. Local newspapers print blurred reproductions, careful not to show children's faces. But the suggestion is enough. The town spirals further into division. Some residents march to the church demanding resignations, while others denounce the images as fabrications designed to wound faith. But the Polaroids resist dismissal. They are not words open to interpretation. They are light and shadow, moments frozen in time, carrying more weight than testimony or tape. The investigators linger on one final photograph. It is the most indistinct, the colors nearly dissolved. But in its center are 6 names scrawled in chalk on the basement wall. The handwriting is childish, uneven, some letters backward. The names match perfectly. Each of the 6 who vanished that day in 1987. Under the names, a line is drawn as though marking a group apart from the rest of the world. Above the line, faint and smudged but legible, is a 7th name, one not on the missing list. Its presence opens a fresh wound of questions. Was there another child? Was it a visitor, a sibling, someone never reported missing? Or was the 7th name erased from history? Like so many details carefully managed by those in power, the Polaroids make it impossible to cling to the official narrative. They are the most intimate evidence yet. Images no institution can wave away as rumor or clerical error. In the silent, frozen gazes of children on photographic paper, the conspiracy ceases to be abstract. It is flesh and blood, presence and absence, names and faces, and now it demands an answer. The sealed chamber beneath the church had already given up fragments. The shoe, the bell, the scribbled drawings, but those finds only deepened the sense that something larger remained hidden. After the photographs surfaced, the investigators gained limited access to a part of the basement previously kept locked by the diocese, under the pretense of archival storage. What? They discovered there would become the most visceral set piece of the entire case. The entrance is unremarkable, a narrow wooden door at the far end of a corridor. Its surface painted the same dull beige as the walls, almost designed to blend into invisibility. A heavy padlock had been installed, but the key finally arrives after weeks of pressure, threats of subpoenas, and a wave of public outrage following the Polaroids release. Even so, church representatives insist they are only allowing entry for the sake of transparency, while warning the team not to misinterpret the artifacts of history. When the lock snaps open and the hinges creak, a thick smell of dust and mold rolls out, mixed with something metallic and faintly sour. The air inside the vaulted chamber feels untouched, stale as though sealed for decades. Flashlights sweep across arched ceilings of old stone, remnants of the original 19th century foundation. Rows of shelves line the walls, stacked with deteriorating boxes, old hymnals, and brass candlesticks coated in grime. At first glance, it resembles a forgotten storeroom. But then further in, a line of concrete blocks catches the light, newer, smoother, a wall built inside the older foundation. Chiseling away at the plaster reveals seams in the concrete, confirming suspicions. This inner wall was erected later, a deliberate partition. The investigators pause, cameras recording every detail, before beginning the slow, painstaking work of breaking through. Each strike reverberates, with the sense of unearthing something the parish never intended to be seen again. After nearly an hour, the wall gives way, opening into a narrow cavity. What lies beyond stops them cold. The cavity is small, barely large enough for a group of children to sit together on the floor. The walls are bare, save for scratches etched into the concrete. Some are crude tally marks, others small drawings, stick figures, crude houses, outlines of animals. In one corner, a faded scrap of fabric rests beneath a layer of dust. The pattern unmistakable when compared to clothing described by surviving family members. On the opposite wall, initials are scratched over and over, as if carved by desperate hands to leave a trace of identity. Most chilling of all, in the far corner sits a rusted metal bed frame, its thin mattress long decayed into coils and dust. The frame is anchored to the wall by chains, though their purpose remains unclear, restraint or reinforcement. Near the bed lies a small tin box, corroded but intact. Inside are a handful of objects: buttons, crumpled wrappers, a bent spoon. Relics of survival, kept like treasures in a place where time must have stretched unbearably slow. The investigators record in silence, their movements slowed by the weight of what they are seeing. The chamber is not a simple storage room. It is a cell, a vault designed not to preserve sacred objects but to contain life. The scratches on the wall confirm what the photographs suggested. The children were here, alive for some time after the night the world was told they had vanished. Later, forensic teams will measure the chamber, sample the dust, and catalog the artifacts. They will determine that the concrete partition dates precisely to the summer of 1987, matching the timeline of the disappearances. They will confirm the scratches were made by human hands, that fibers from the fabric match clothing purchased in the town that year. But none of those technical details can compete with the immediate human reaction. This space is a wound. It breathes with the memory of fear, endurance, and silence. Word of the vaulted room spreads quickly, carried by journalists waiting outside. By evening, headlines speak not of rumors or allegations, but of a chamber beneath the church. The images of its interior, scratched walls, the rusted bed frame, the tin box, run across news outlets, igniting outrage far beyond the small town. For the first time, denial seems impossible. The evidence is no longer circumstantial. It is physical, architectural, undeniable. Still questions loom. How long were the children kept here? Who had access to the room? And perhaps most haunting, what became of them after the last tally mark was scratched into the wall? The vaulted chamber confirms captivity, but it does not yet tell the ending. And in the shadows of that unanswered question, fear grows that the truth is even darker than anyone dared imagine. The vaulted chamber changes everything. For weeks, the investigation had been wrestling with denials, missing records, and the weight of history that pressed down on anyone who dared question the church. But once the photographs in the sealed room are revealed, silence itself begins to crack, and it is in that rupture that a witness finally steps forward. She is an older woman now, her hair thin and white, her hands trembling as she grips a cane. For decades, she has lived just 2 streets over from the church, in a narrow house with lace curtains and a front porch that has begun to sag. To neighbors, she was always polite but private, the kind of woman who attended services regularly, yet avoided gossip. When approached by the investigators earlier in the summer, she offered nothing more than a polite shake of the head. But after seeing the chamber on the news, seeing the tally marks and the cot, she can no longer hold her silence. In a quiet interview filmed in her dim living room, she begins to recount what she heard on the night of July 19th, 1987. The church picnic had ended around dusk, she says, and most families drifted home by 9. Yet long after the laughter faded, she remembers hearing sounds from the direction of the parish basement. At first she thought it was just the janitor moving tables. But the noises were different, muffled voices, a child's cry quickly hushed, the scrape of something heavy being dragged. She lay awake listening, torn between fear and disbelief. Her voice wavers as she admits that she did nothing. She tells the investigators she was a widow then, alone, afraid to speak against the priests who controlled not only the church, but the very heartbeat of the town. You didn't question them, she says, her eyes glassy. Not if you wanted to keep your life in one piece. But guilt has gnawed at her for years. When the first police search swept through, she considered speaking up, but her neighbors insisted the children must have wandered into the woods. To say otherwise would have been to invite anger, or worse. She recalls other moments, too. A few nights after the disappearance, she passed by the church on her way home from a late errand. From beneath the rectory windows, she heard faint singing, a hymn sung not by adults, but in the high-pitched, wavering voices of children. The sound chilled her because by then everyone knew the 6 were missing. She told herself it must be her imagination, or perhaps a recording. Yet the melody stayed with her all these years. When she heard the cassette tape the investigators released, the bells in the background, the frightened tones, it confirmed what she already feared. The children had not vanished that night. They had been kept somewhere close. Her testimony fills in a gap that artifacts alone cannot. It transforms mute evidence into lived memory, tying the chamber, the Polaroids, and the tape into a timeline of confinement. But it also carries a shadow of complicity, the weight of years where she, and perhaps others, heard echoes of truth and chose silence. The investigators do not treat her with hostility. Instead, they let the camera linger on her face, a mixture of sorrow and relief as the words spill out. For her, speaking now is both confession and penance. When her account is shared, the backlash is swift. Some parish loyalists accuse her of fabricating stories to gain attention. calling her a frail old woman chasing relevance. Others condemn her for staying quiet for so long, insisting that lives might have been saved if she had spoken sooner. Yet many in town, especially those who always harbored quiet doubts, see her as courageous. Her testimony opens the floodgates. Whispers rise of other parishioners who heard footsteps in the basement at odd hours, or who noticed fresh locks on doors that had never been locked before. What makes her account most devastating is its ordinariness. There is no grand revelation of names or faces, no document stamped with proof. It is a simple memory of sounds at night, the kind of thing easy to dismiss in 1987, but impossible to ignore in light of what the investigators have uncovered. It bridges the past and present, reminding everyone that the truth was never fully hidden, only ignored, because people feared what acknowledging it might cost them. By the time the interview ends, the investigators know they have crossed another threshold. The vaulted chamber proved captivity. The Polaroids dated it. Now the witness gives it breath, sound, and human presence. Silence has been broken, and with it, the official story begins to collapse under its own weight. The witness's voice, fragile but unwavering, sends shockwaves beyond the confines of her lace-curtained living room. By the time the interview is released, it has already been copied, clipped, and passed around on social media. People hear the tremor in her words, the description of children's voices carried on night air, and something in the way she says, "I did nothing, and it haunted me for 37 years. It's raw, unpolished, undeniable. For the diocese, however, it is the breaking point. Up to now, their strategy has been polite dismissal, clerical errors, faded memories, nothing substantial. But once the vaulted chamber and the Polaroids are paired with a living witness account, the institution moves from passive defense to outright attack. Letters begin arriving at the investigators' offices, formal legal notices embossed with the church's seal. They are accused of defamation, of knowingly spreading falsehoods to injure the sacred reputation of the parish. Threats of lawsuits dangle over every future broadcast. In press conferences, diocesan spokesmen shift tone from conciliatory to combative, denouncing the entire investigation as a cruel fabrication designed to wound faith and sow division in the flock. The phrasing is deliberate, casting the investigators not as seekers of truth but as outsiders, poisoning the community. Behind closed doors, pressure intensifies. Local businesses that quietly lent support to the production team suddenly back away, citing anonymous phone calls warning them to stay clear of trouble. A landlord who rented workspace to the investigators receives a letter hinting that continued cooperation might complicate his standing with the parish. Even some of the families who lost children feel the squeeze. Priests visiting their homes under the guise of pastoral care, gently reminding them of the importance of forgiveness and not being misled by hostile forces. The intimidation is not subtle. One of the investigators finds her car tires slashed in the church parking lot after a meeting. Another reports that his elderly father, who still lives in town, received a phone call late at night from a man who whispered only one sentence: "Be careful what your son is digging up." Police reports are filed, but little comes of them. The sense of vulnerability grows. The institution, with all its resources and reach, has turned its weight directly on those who threaten its story. Publicly, though, the diocese frames itself as the victim. In a Sunday homily broadcast across the state, the bishop paints a picture of persecution. The church has always suffered slander from those who despise the light. This is but another trial we must endure. The congregation rises in applause, many nodding with tears in their eyes. The narrative is working, at least for some. Instead of confronting the evidence, the institution is rallying its faithful around a new battle cry that faith itself is under siege, but for others, the aggression only deepens suspicion. If the investigation were truly baseless, why would the diocese respond with such ferocity? Why attempt to silence families, businesses, and ordinary citizens? Why paint elderly witnesses as liars? Local reporters begin to probe these questions, and cracks appear in the media coverage. One regional newspaper runs a front-page editorial: "If there is nothing to hide, why is the church so afraid of sunlight?" Inside the investigators' rented workspace, the team regroups. Maps of the parish and timelines of July 1987 still line the walls, but now security cameras have been hastily installed at the entrance, and meetings are hushed. There is fear, yes, but also a grim clarity. The escalation means the diocese feels threatened. The artifacts, the witness, the vaulted chamber, they are striking at something the institution cannot allow to be fully seen. The backlash, in a way, is confirmation. The section closes with a juxtaposition. Parishioners kneeling in candlelight, listening to sermons about unity and resilience while just outside. Investigators sift through photocopied ledgers and photographs of scratched walls, piecing together a story the church insists does not exist. The battle lines are no longer subtle. They are drawn wide and sharp, the sacred institution on one side, and the truth, fragile but growing louder, on the other. The vaulted chamber and the photographs had already stirred local outrage. But once the diocese launched its aggressive counteroffensive, the story broke containment. National outlets that once ignored the case now devoted long features to it. A small-town disappearance from 1987, once relegated to the status of unsolved tragedy, was suddenly recast as a living scandal. A decades-long cover-up unraveling in real time. Reporters flooded into town, their satellite vans clogging narrow streets around the church. Cameras trailed the investigators, recording every movement as they carried boxes of evidence into their temporary office. At night, panel shows debated the implications. Was this proof of systemic abuse? Were church leaders complicit, or was it the act of a rogue few? Viewers argued online, their threads running into the thousands, as strangers across the country felt the pull of a mystery that blurred the line between faith and fear. In town, the effect was explosive. Parishioners arrived for Sunday Mass to find protesters gathered outside, some holding enlarged images of the Polaroids with the children's faces blurred out, others carrying signs that read, "Where are they?" and "No more secrets." The faithful filed past in silence, some glaring, some weeping, many simply looking down at the pavement. For the first time in living memory, the church was not the unshakable heart of the community. It was its most embattled institution. The families of the missing children found themselves unwilling symbols. For years they had borne their grief privately, resigned to the silence of an unsolved case. Now their doorsteps were crowded with microphones, their lives dissected by commentators who knew nothing of the aching years they had endured. Some embraced the spotlight, determined that the renewed attention might finally yield answers. Others recoiled, furious that their children's pain was once again fodder for strangers. Curiosity. In one emotional press gathering, a father raised a Polaroid of his daughter's toy truck, now matched to the one in the basement cache, and demanded, through tears, that the bishop resign. His voice broke on the words, and for a long moment, the room was silent. The fallout rippled through public institutions as well. City council members faced urgent calls to investigate the parish finances. The county sheriff, who had been a young deputy in 1987, now faced difficult questions about the original search effort. Why had the basement never been inspected? Why were parish records accepted at face value? He gave halting answers about procedures of the time, but they rang hollow against the backdrop of physical evidence dug out of concrete. In schools and diners, arguments split friendships. Teachers who had once led children to Sunday services found themselves heckled in grocery aisles. Elderly parishioners who defended the clergy were accused of blindness. Younger residents who had grown up with unanswered whispers voiced their anger more freely. The case was no longer only about 6 children. It had become a referendum on trust, power, and the lengths to which institutions would go to protect themselves. Even within the church walls, cracks appeared. A small group of younger priests issued a cautious statement, calling for full transparency and repentance, though they stopped short of naming the bishop. Parish bulletins now included subtle pleas for unity, for healing, for patience, but the words sounded brittle, drowned out by the roar of coverage on the evening news. The investigators, caught in the maelstrom, recognized both the opportunity and the danger. Every broadcast widened their reach, but also sharpened the church's hostility. For them, the attention meant leverage. Subpoenas that once sat dormant were suddenly expedited. Archivists once hesitant to cooperate now felt protected by the weight of public scrutiny. But it also meant scrutiny of their own motives, with some commentators accusing them of chasing sensationalism rather than justice. As autumn drew near, the town's air seemed charged with tension. Candlelight vigils were held on the church lawn, some led by grieving families, others by parish loyalists who prayed, not for justice, but for protection from false accusations. Each vigil seemed to echo the other, two realities coexisting uneasily in the same streets. The section closes with a single broadcast image, a drone shot of the town at dusk, the church steeple rising above rows of quiet houses. Around the steeple, protesters hold candles, their flickering light forming a ring of fire at the church's base. From above, the effect is haunting, an ancient institution, still standing but now encircled by flames of doubt that will not be extinguished. In the middle of the uproar, with reporters still camping outside the parish and protesters holding vigil by candlelight, a quieter moment of reckoning unfolds. The families, weary of noise and speculation, gather at the edge of the town's small memorial park. It had been built in the late 1990s, with a single stone marker and austere slab engraved with the 6 children's names, erected more as a gesture of finality than remembrance. For years, the stone stood largely ignored, flowers placed there only on anniversaries by grieving parents. But now, with the chamber uncovered and the Polaroids surfacing, the marker takes on new weight. On a crisp autumn afternoon, the families return to the park, this time accompanied by the investigators and a handful of townspeople who feel the need to bear witness. They bring boxes of candles, framed photographs, and the very artifacts that have forced the case open. Copies of the drawings found in the sealed room, blurred reproductions of the Polaroids, even the rusted bicycle bell, now cleaned and sealed in glass. They arrange these items around the stone marker, transforming the once sterile monument into something alive with memory. The scene is filmed, but the cameras keep their distance. The air is hushed, as though the town itself understands this is not spectacle, but confession. It is here that the investigators reveal their latest find, an old parish ledger, unearthed not from the basement but from the diocesan archive, released only after weeks of public pressure. At first, the book appears routine, its pages filled with donations, expenses, and neat clerical handwriting. But in the section for July 1987, one entry stands out. It records a special allocation of $800, marked not for repairs or supplies but for memorial preparation. The date on the entry is July 21st, just 2 days after the children vanished. The word memorial chills the families. At that point, the search was still ongoing, the community still combing the woods and pleading on local news broadcasts for information. Yet the parish ledger shows someone already designating funds for remembrance before any bodies were found, before the official declaration of presumed death. To the families, it feels like a pre-written ending, a plan already in motion while they clung to hope. The entry raises new, painful questions. Who authorized it? Why was it not disclosed during the initial investigation? And what did the parish mean by memorial preparation when the children had, in the public record, simply disappeared? The handwriting in the ledger is carefully compared to that in parish bulletins from the same summer. The match is striking. Whoever wrote "quiet" on the Polaroids and dated them in careful script appears to be the same hand that signed off on the memorial funds. As this discovery is read aloud at the memorial park, parents grip one another's hands tightly. Some weep openly. One mother lays her palm against the stone marker, as though trying to draw warmth from its cold surface. Another parent whispers almost to himself, "They knew. They always knew." The cameras capture the moment but do not intrude. The silence of the gathering speaks louder than any commentary. The townspeople, who once resisted the investigation, begin to soften in the face of these quiet facts. This is not the chaos of protests or the fury of press conferences. It is a ledger, ink on paper, placed in the hands of the very people who have suffered most. The effect is devastating because it is so mundane. Bureaucracy recorded what the heart could not bear, that someone in authority wrote off the children before the search had barely begun. By evening, the candles flicker around the memorial stone, their wax dripping in small pools on the grass. The investigators stand slightly apart, recognizing that this moment belongs not to them, but to the families. Yet they also know the ledger is more than grief. It is evidence. A document that ties directly into finances, authorization, and intent. And with it, the narrative of accident or disappearance collapses further, leaving only the grim suggestion of foreknowledge and concealment. The section closes with a shot of the ledger itself, its faded ink illuminated by the glow of candlelight. The pages rustle gently in the breeze, a sound almost like breathing. Around it, the names on the stone stand unchanging. But for the first time in decades, the town begins to reckon with the possibility that those names were engraved not in mourning but in complicity. The investigation reaches its crescendo not in a basement, nor in the quiet corners of an archive, but in front of the world. After months of leaks, discoveries, and escalating tension, the investigators secure a live broadcast slot with a regional news station. The choice is deliberate. By going public in real time, they cut off the diocese's ability to intercept, edit, or discredit their findings before they can reach the audience. The town gathers around televisions in diners, living rooms, and parish halls. Across the state, curious viewers tune in, drawn by the headline that has dominated for weeks: 6 children, a church basement, and the sealed room of 1987. The studio is stark: a plain table, 2 chairs, and behind it a projection screen waiting to display the evidence. The lead investigator, visibly worn by months of sleepless nights and constant pressure, speaks with measured calm. He begins not with accusations, but with the images everyone has already seen: the Polaroids, the scratches on the wall, the chamber with its cotton tally marks. These artifacts are framed not as mysteries, but as facts, objects anyone can examine, touch, and test. The camera lingers long enough on each image to remind viewers that this is not rumor, but material reality. Then the revelations deepen. On screen appears the parish ledger, the $800 memorial preparation entry dated July 21st, 1987. The investigator explains the timing, pointing out that it was logged while the search for the children was still active. He cross-references the handwriting, overlaying samples from the ledger and the Polaroids, highlighting the identical loops and slants. A silence grips the studio as the implication sinks in. The same hand that authorized the funds for a memorial also wrote the names of the missing children on a basement wall. The next piece of evidence is audio. The cassette tape plays, its muffled children's voices underscored by the toll of the bells. But this time, a second audio track overlays it. Municipal records of bell schedules from July 1987, proving that the specific sequence of chimes occurred at 8 p.m., well after the children were reported missing. The synchronization is precise, inarguable. Someone recorded them alive when, officially, they were already gone. Finally, the broadcast unveils a single Polaroid not shown before. It depicts the 6 children together in the basement chamber, seated against the wall where tally marks would later be found. Above them, faint but visible, is the 7th name scrawled in chalk. The camera zooms close enough for viewers to see the uneven lettering. A child's uncertain hand. The name is unfamiliar, not among the missing 6. Its presence opens a terrifying question. Was there another child whose disappearance was never reported, never mourned, never remembered? The tension in the studio is palpable. The investigator does not speculate wildly, but lets the evidence speak. He stresses that these materials have been authenticated by independent experts, that no institution, not even one as powerful as the diocese, can erase what is now visible to everyone. His final words are steady. The children did not vanish into thin air. They were here beneath the church, seen and heard long after the official story said otherwise. Someone knew. Someone decided what truth would survive. And now that truth is here for you to see. The broadcast reverberates instantly. Social media erupts with shock and outrage. Clips circulating faster than fact-checkers can keep up. Some viewers weep openly, recounting their own childhoods in parishes where doors were locked and questions discouraged. Others rage, demanding resignations, indictments, answers. Outside the church itself, crowds gather by nightfall, holding candles and signs that read, "We believe the children." Inside the parish hall, the bishop attempts to stage a rebuttal, denouncing the broadcast as a spectacle of lies. But his words are drowned out by chants from outside. For the first time, his authority falters. Not because of rumor or accusation, but because the evidence has been placed in plain sight, beyond denial. The section closes with the live feed cutting to black after the final words, the studio lights dimming, and the investigators stepping away from the table. In the silence that follows, the town and the wider world are left to reckon with a truth too long sealed away, now undeniable and echoing far beyond the chamber where it began. The night after the broadcast, the town is quiet in a way it hasn't been in months. The protests thin out, the reporters pack up their vans, and even the cathedral stands hushed, its stained glass windows glowing faintly in the moonlight. But for the families of the 6 children, silence doesn't feel like peace. It feels like aftermath. They gather once more at the memorial park, not for cameras this time, not for a statement or a vigil, but for themselves. The candles from the last gathering have melted, into hardened puddles along the stone base, their wax catching the pale glow of the street lamps. Parents and siblings bring fresh flowers. Some place small toys, marbles, a doll's shoe, a plastic soldier that once belonged to the children. For the first time, the memorial doesn't feel like a dead end. It feels like a doorway, one that grief has forced open. The investigators are present too, though they stand back, watching respectfully. They understand that what they've done is only part of the story. Evidence may speak, but grief belongs to the families. One by one, relatives touch the engraved names, some whispering prayers, others only standing silently with closed eyes. In those moments, closure doesn't mean answers. It means acknowledgement, finally, after 37 years of gaslighting. Silence and official dismissal. But even as the air thickens with remembrance, another weight lingers. The Polaroid shown during the broadcast, the one with the 7th name, hangs in everyone's mind. It has been blurred in official publications to protect its integrity, but the families have seen it unedited. The chalk writing is unmistakable. 6 names they know like their own breath, and then one more, written faintly, uncertainly, as though by a child's trembling hand. The investigators cannot ignore it. After the families drift home, the lead archivist and the detective sit in the dim park, reviewing parish records again. The ledger, the attendance rosters, the donation lists, all neatly filed, but none containing that 7th name. It is as though the child never existed or was erased deliberately. Yet the scrawl in chalk tells otherwise. Children don't invent companions with surnames, nor do they etch them next to their own when their days are measured in tally marks. In the following days, whispers spread quietly among the townspeople. An older man recalls that in the summer of 1987, he saw a boy at the parish picnic who didn't belong to any family he knew. A woman confides that her mother once mentioned another child when discussing the tragedy, though she never pressed for details. But there are no missing persons reports. No photographs, no trace in public memory. The absence is almost louder than presence. The documentary closes with a scene inside the church itself. Renovations continue. Contractors moving cautiously around the now infamous sealed chamber. Dust drifts through shafts of light. On a workbench nearby lies a small box of salvaged items, rusted tools, scraps of wood, fragments of plaster. Among them, unnoticed at first, is a folded piece of lined notebook paper, yellowed with age. An investigator carefully smooths it open. The handwriting is clumsy, clearly a child's, the pencil faded but legible. It reads, "If they don't find us, tell my mom I tried to help." At the bottom, a name is signed, not one of the 6, but the same faint 7th name that appeared on the wall. The camera doesn't linger long. It only shows the words once, then cuts back to the memorial stone in the park. The engraved names glow in the fading light of dusk. 6 children memorialized, their story finally dragged from shadow into the world. Yet the paper in the investigator's hands suggests something larger, something unfinished. The final narration is quiet, almost a whisper. The sealed room has been opened, and with it, 37 years of silence. But some silences remain. Somewhere in the archives, in memory, or in ground not yet disturbed, there is still one more name. The screen fades to black, and then in a final frame a single word appears. The 7th name. Nothing more. A soft seed planted not for spectacle, but as an unsettling reminder that even in closure, there are always doors still locked, still waiting to be opened.